Let's see. Okay.
Is prayer appropriate in the workplace?
Foxside business analyst Lisa Murphy is here to explain this. People are praying at work. It's like a group.
They are, but prayer in a very literal sense, not prayer like kneeling in a pew. And, you know, so many of the city's best and brightest have fallen from grace over the last couple of years. Some overcome by greed, others by a desire for power. While tighter rules and regulations may prevent another Bernard Madoff-like Ponzi scheme, but maybe prayer is a simpler solution.
Like any successful executive, David Arena is a risk taker. But as president of real estate firm Grubb & Ellis, David covers territory even the most daring fear to tread.
You see all the bad behavior that's occurring in the world. Well, that bad behavior may be because when we come to work, we, in a sense, discount the fact that we are both fully human and fully spiritual.
So for 5 minutes every Monday, David, raised as a Catholic, turns the firm's weekly planning meeting into a prayer session of sorts. He hands the reins over to Alan Lurie, who's both a managing director and an ordained rabbi.
Some of us may want to return to days that we think in some way were better than what we're experiencing now. And through a sense of uncertainty, some of us may be feeling fearful, and I know sometimes I do.
5 minutes may not seem like much time for such a weighty topic, but Alan says these moments make a lasting impression.
I'd like to propose that we look at uncertainty in a different way. Uncertainty can be a great gift, right? It can be a gift of grace.
And now, more than ever, Alan says his colleagues take comfort in hearing that message in the workplace.
In tough times, people collapse, and when you're collapsed at that level and you're in a fearful mode, it's very hard to lift yourself up to more spiritual, lofty goals because you're just in a survival mode. But that's the time we need it the most.
Gail Meredith says she was well aware of Grubb & Ellis' sterling reputation before joining the team, but she was surprised at how literally the firm practiced what it preached.
I've never really seen or heard anything like that in a sales meeting, and I've been in New York real estate since '93, so I'm used to some pretty, knock down, drag out, sales meetings.
It's not only helped with morale, it's also helped with the bottom line.
When you get out of your own sort of self-serving ways, you feel better, you act differently, and I think the results are tremendously better. You talked about how do you measure it. We measure everything.
Well, Alan has written a book about the 5 minutes he spends every Monday. It's this book called 5 Minutes on Monday by right now. It's chock full of some of the prayers that they have, and when I say prayers, I say that very liberally, but how they actually use it in the workplace, how to use it with clients, how to think about faith, and think about how you do business and how that factors into doing business the right way.
Now, it would seem, though, if somebody were uncomfortable with that, and it looks like just about everybody there is comfortable, if somebody were uncomfortable, that they might be able to do something about it, right?
You're saying object to it? Or
Object,
quit?
and perhaps, well, is that because it's a private agency, it's not a state-run agency, so they can do really whatever they want?
Yeah, this is, I think, it's not a mandatory thing, it's completely voluntary. You can elect to leave that meeting. It is part of the business meeting that they have.
If I elect to leave that meeting, well, I'm concerned about, okay, he's not as spiritual as the others, you know what I mean? I'm saying, right?
No, I think it's completely voluntary. You do not get that sense at all that it felt like, okay, here comes the prayer session, now everyone has to come. David Arena, who's the president of the firm, is very open. He's Catholic, Alan's a rabbi, he's Jewish, and people could draw their own opinions as to whether or not this was a useful way to spend their 5 minutes or doing something else.
Lisa Murphy, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, so that's the piece, which I think gives a kind of an introduction to what we are and what we do. And oh, this is great. So what I loved about that piece was the dialogue between the two reporters at the end, right? One resisting it, I don't feel good about this, the other one trying to reframe it. So this whole idea of a spiritual businessman, I mean, to many people it's an oxymoron. It's like jumbo shrimp or Civil War, right? A spiritual businessman. And I think we struggle with it for maybe 3 reasons. One, we wonder, is this really possible? I mean, business is a tough world. New York City, commercial real estate. You can't imagine a business tougher than that, right? So how does that kind of go into that? I think the other question is it even desirable? I mean, because what are we talking about here? Are we talking about religion? Are we talking about prayer? Are we talking about proselytizing? It makes people uncomfortable. And I think the third reason is people don't really even know what we're talking about. when we talk about spirituality. A lot of these words are bandied about, and we hear them: faith, religion, spirituality, God, all these things. And whenever I say God to anybody, there's 50 people here, I guarantee there's 50 different visions of it, and probably each of us think that our vision's the right one, right? And so it's hard to have a dialogue. So I'd like to spend a little time going through some definitions with you. Now, these are my definitions, right? Other people have different definitions, but as I speak, these are the ones that I'm going to use. And I also want to let you know, these are ideal definitions, right? All the things I talked about are really tools. Faith, religion, spirit, there are tools. People can take those tools and pervert them for their own reasons. I compare this to a hammer. I mean, you can use a hammer to build something or break a window. The hammer is not wrong. It's how it's used that defines what it does. So let's look at a couple of these together. I think spiritual, let's hit this one first. This is my definition, and I've bopped this around in my head for a long time, and it really seems to work for me. It's the experience of a transformative connection, right? So I want to tell you my favorite joke, by the way. So here's my favorite joke. Sharon has heard this before. So there's a man who walks into a confessional booth, and he sits down, and the priest slides open the door and says, "My son, let me hear your confession." And he says, "Well, Father," he says, "I have a confession to make." He says, "I'm a 70-year-old man. I flew to Sweden recently on business, and on the airplane with these two gorgeous stewardesses, and I flirted with them, we had some drinks. I took them to a hotel, and we made mad, passionate love all night long." And the priest goes, "Wow." He says, "Well, you know, I forgive you." He says, "When was the last time you were at confession?" Man says, "I've never been to confession, I'm Jewish." And the priest says, "So why are you telling me this?" He said, "I will tell anybody who will listen." So when you have a powerful experience that redefines who you think you are and what you think you can do, you want to tell people about it. So that's become my passion. So to spiritual, let's look at this. It has to have these three components. It has to be experienced. Spirituality is not conceptual. It has to transform you, and it has to be about a connection. Right? So the story I love is my wife and I recently went to a prayer service, and people are closing their eyes and they're meditating, and they're meditating on the fact that we're all one, and they're meditating on love that flows through all of humanity. And there's this one woman who's meditating on this, and I walk by and I accidentally step on her toe. She opens her eyes and she goes, "Watch it, pal." Right? So that's not spiritual. So again, keep this in mind. It needs to be experienced, it needs to change you, and it needs to be about connection. The connection can be between people, right? There's two levels of connection between people, and there's a connection between man and the divine realm, or humanity and the divine realm. Those are two different types of connections. Okay? And we'll come back to this. So therefore, spirit as a noun is that which is present in the experience of that connection. Okay, so when you make a deep, profound connection with another person or with the divine in a way that you experience and that changes you, spirit is present at that moment. This is the kind of a very Buddhist idea that spirit is the ground of being that you touch into at that moment when you make that connection.